Welcome to another episode of Mind Games. Today we're going to be looking at the history of behavioral economics. We're going to be looking at key actors in the field. We're going to be looking at key case studies of when it's been implemented in public policy. And we're essentially just going to be looking at key figures. This is going to give you an overall insight and a slight introduction to how it started and why it started and the way it started. So behavioral economics had a very philosophical root. It didn't start as other social sciences or sciences would start. It started in the late 19th and early 20th century, so it began very much after neoclassical economics and pioneers like Adam Smith had created were the founding fathers of economics. So this happened mainly when psychologists themselves started questioning the notion of human rationality or the notion of human rationality that was posited by neoclassical economics. So by this we had figures like Thorstein Veblen, Herbert Simon, and later Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky together along with Richard Thaler. They begin to argue about how human behavior often deviates from the purely rational decision-making model proposed by classical economics, and that continues to be posited. So the first one who really foundationally said this was Herbert Simon. He introduced the concept of bounded rationality, suggesting that individuals are not always optimal decision makers due to the fact that they have limitations in knowledge and computational capacities, specifically their ability to make calculations and understand the pros and the cons of something. So he proposed that people often settle for something that's good enough or that's just suffices rather than the optimal one or a behavior that he coined or termed satisfactating. So Herbert Simon was not just an economist, he was actually a political scientist, sociologist, and psychologist. This theory of bounded rationality not only challenged the notion of humans being perfectly rational agents, which is the very foundation of behavioral economics, but it also suggested that they operate under constraints that completely limit their decision-making abilities, making them quote-unquote irrational. His interdisciplinary approach really laid the groundwork for understanding decision-making in complex environments, which in fact earned him the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences in 1978. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, two people who we've already talked about earlier in the series, were a real pivot to what we now recognize as behavioral economics. They began their research into heuristics and biases, and a lot of the heuristics and biases that were noted and stated in the first episode along with the other episodes were in fact discovered with them and researched by them. This includes the availability heuristic, representativeness heuristic, and prospect theory, which we had a whole episode on. They essentially highlighted the systematic ways in which humans' judgments and decisions diverge from those predicted by standard neoclassical economic theory. Now, Kahneman was a psychologist and Tversky was a cognitive and mathematical psychologist. So they were not economics of any kind, but they were able to use their interdisciplinary thinking and interest in economics along with their prowess in psychology to begin their research, and their work on prospect theory was absolutely amazing, which made sure that Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences in 2002. Unfortunately, Amos Tversky had passed away by then, but yes. Next, we have some mainstream acceptance and expansion and research that's been done, primarily by Richard Thaler. He is a tenured professor at the University of Chicago, and he's been doing it since the 1980s to present. His contribution has been mainly to the concept of mental accounting and nudge theory, something he's written several books on. And he is the main forefather in the establishment of the sort of derivative of behavioral economics, which is behavioral finance. It's been instrumental in applying behavioral economics to policy making, personal finance, and securities markets. So his work along with Cass Sunstein on the nudge theory has shown how subtle changes in the way choices are presented can significantly influence the decisions that people make. His work has been extremely pivotal in applying behavioral economics to our practical problems. So, this takes the irrationality of the actors in play in economics past just the theoretical play and past the controlled play that we have in research. Rather, we're now looking at it from a more practical way where we see research done into actual bubbles and subsequent crashes. We see research into small scale securities markets incidents where stuff like the efficient market theory, which was posited by Eugene Fama and discussed in one of our earlier episodes, was completely disproved. And when the deliverable assets of a certain entity is lower than their market value. So yeah, he had a considerable impact on all these fields, and his work has really popularized behavioral economics on the standpoint from academics to policy to actually taking into the theory into account when making concepts. He earned the Nobel Prize in economics in 2017. So, behavioral economics, like I stated in practice, has a lot of interdisciplinary applications as well as applications in numerous fields. So, the biggest one is public policy, which is extremely important as more so even than securities markets. Public policy encompasses the entire population, and when something like public policy is related to, you have to one has to understand, or one entity or governmental entity has to understand the wide scale impact that could happen, and has to understand that there is a spectrum of how people act and how people make decisions. So one great example of this is UK's Behavioral Insights team, which uses principles of behavioral economics to design more effective public policies in the state of the United Kingdom. Now, another place that this has really impacted is finance, where we can understand biases and heuristics that allows us to develop tools and products that help individuals make better investment decisions. So a great example of this was Goldman Sachs and Apple's collaboration on their credit card, which has unfortunately been paused. But essentially what happened was Apple made a great application, a great system where customers of this credit card were reminded in certain ways of their debt and how they had to pay it back. And because of this, they saw a sharp increase in the amount of people paying back and not defaulting on their credit card debt. And it really had a positive impact on the people. So some key studies and experiments which really show behavioral economics at play and really furthered the field as a whole was first the ultimatum game, which demonstrated how fairness considerations can override rational profit maximizing behavior. So that's how people look at how fair something is or how something is good enough rather than how much profit it can make on a wide scale. Then is the marshmallow test, which highlighted the struggle between self-control and immediate gratification, with implications for understanding savings behavior. So a big thing about behavioral economics is that humans often like to gratify themselves instantly. They often like to realize profit, realize gain instantly rather than wait out in the long term when it would sometimes be profitable to do so. Next, third, we have the Asian disease problem, which illustrated how framing effects can dramatically influence decision-making processes. So this is just the wide-scale summary of what has happened. We're going to go through into some of case studies now, which really show how behavioral economics is truly powerful and how it genuinely helps certain classes of people and certain entities make better decisions and make better public policies. So first, the case study one is retirement savings, the power of defaults and automatic escalation. So one of the most significant applications of behavioral economics in finance is the design of retirement saving plans that leverage default options and automatic escalation. So the background is research indicates that while people intend to save for retirement, they often procrastinate or opt not to because of inertia and the complexity of choices. This is a very simple way of defining the fact that people like to delay gratification. People like to instantaneously take gratification. They like to think about planning and think about rationality as an afterthought rather than what's comfortable. So the intervention that was used, that was behavioral economics, and that was foundationally made by behavioral economics, was the introduction of automatic enrollment in retirement savings plans. So these were where employees are automatically enrolled into these saving plans unless they specifically opt out. This significantly increased participation rates for them, and also with automatic escalation, it automatically increases the savings rate over time. It helped individuals save significantly more without having to make an active decision each time. So this means that people in fact want to take good decisions for themselves, but due to the fact that it is too hard, too complex, too many choices, and they wouldn't want to do it at that moment, in simple terms. The next case study is the behavioral bias of overconfidence in trading in securities markets. So overconfidence is a very well documented bias, which we discovered earlier in our episodes too, where individuals really overestimate their knowledge, ability, and accuracy of their predictions. In finance, this bias can lead to excessive trading, as investors believe that they can predict market movements better than others. And this is disproven many times, as we see that, if I'm not wrong, it was around 97% of investment managers lose or don't make as much as the market of the S&P 500, which is the wide scale index in the United States of America. So yeah. So overconfident investors normally trade more frequently than is needed or warranted. And because of this, they believe they're in superior ability, and they do this as a derivative of the same. So the evidence that shows this is completely wrong is a research paper actually cited in my documents in the comments is Baba and Odie in 2000 conducted a landmark study analyzing the trading records of over 35,000 households. They found that investors who traded the most, driven by overconfidence, on an annual return 6.5% points lower than the market, which is significant in terms of inflation and in terms of downsiding risk. So the case study 3 is nudging towards better mortgage choices. So choosing a mortgage is one of the most significant financial decisions individuals make, and as it involves their house, as it involves an extremely important asset, or for some people, liability. The complexity of the options and cognitive biases can lead to suboptimal choices in mortgages and honestly irrational behavior. So consumers often focus too much on short-term costs, such as initial interest rates, without fully understanding the long-term implications of different types of mortgages. This is extremely important because people value their money over the short term much more than they value their money over the long term, when in fact your money over the long term makes much more sense to value your money over the long term because it has more value to you, and it will have more value to you in the long term because of things like saving, things like compounding, things like investing. So the intervention that was used, that was based on behavioral economics, was that researchers and policymakers have explored ways to nudge consumers towards better solutions and decisions. For example, simplifying representations of mortgage options highlights the total cost over time, and using default options that guide consumers towards fixed rate mortgages unless they choose otherwise. Now, we could say this is conspiracy, we could say this is ploys, but in fact they have it has seen that studies showed that clearer, more straightforward presentations of mortgage options can significantly help consumers make choices that align more closely with their long-term financial interests and goals, in line with their income and other things. Efforts in the United Kingdom and the European Union to standardize mortgage disclosures are examples of how behavioral insights lead to key policy changes that assist consumers in navigating complex financial decisions. So our fourth and last case study is behavioral biases in investment fund selection. So mutual funds, hedge funds, things like that. Investors' choices among mutual funds are often influenced by factors unrelated to the fund's long-term performance, which is honestly, one of the key factors and one of the only things that matters, such as recent returns or high visibility in the media. This is stuff like this is posited by behavioral economics, which your biases and heuristics, such as the recency bias, which is overweighting recent events, and familiarity bias, which is preferring familiar investments even though they might be inferior in nature. So this can lead to investors to choose investment funds that are not aligned with their best interest financially. So the intervention is financial education programs that emphasize the importance of diversified portfolios and the long-term perspective, along with platforms that curate choices to include those only with solid long-term performance records are used to mitigate these biases. Now, the results of this are varied, but evidence suggests that when investors are provided with clearer, more relevant information about long term performance and fees, they make much better choices. For instance, a focus on reducing the choice overload effect by offering a more curated set of options has shown to lead to higher satisfaction and potentially better financial outcomes for investors. These case studies are extremely key to exemplify the practical applications of behavioral economics in the finance sector, demonstrating its capacity to enhance financial decision making and well being. Through a deeper understanding of this human psychology, financial services can be designed to help individuals overcome biases and achieve better financial outcomes, being a win win situation for both the client and the company providing the service. Now, there are some criticisms and challenges that behavioral economics has. It has provided profound insights into human behavior, but it is not without its critics. Some argue that the field lacks one unifying theory like neoclassical economics does. And while it may be interesting because of the fact that they're so arbitrary and based on certain aspects and stuff that's not, and things that are not necessarily quantifiable, it's not universally applicable in nature. And a lot of people that are even Nobel laureates contend that the emphasis on irrationality may overlook the context in which traditional economic models do hold. So, as a short conclusion, behavioral economics continues to evolve, with researchers exploring deeper into the nuances of human behavior and decision making. The integration of even neuroscience through the emerging field of neuroeconomics promises to offer even more insights into the biological and neurological underpinnings of economic decisions. As it stands, behavioral economics has not only reshaped our understanding of economics as a whole, but it has also fundamentally altered how we approach human behavior in a variety of domains. And this is the key point that we should understand, is that noticing these biases in ourselves and in other people is key, because for example, in ourselves, they can be fixed extremely. And in securities markets and emerging markets, they can, in fact, be exploited to some extent. Now, this is not investment advice, it is simply an idea. So, for further exploration, if you all want to, you all can explore seminal works by Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, an amazing book I've read myself. Thaler, Misbehaving, the maker of behavioral economics, also a very good book. Ariely, Predictably Irrational, which all offer detailed insights into the field's development and application. Thank you for this quick episode of Mind Games, and wait for next week.